You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Welcome back to our long-running series on Bath, North Carolina. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
I'm your co-host, Michael Williams.
And we totally haven't recorded all of these in a row. We totally have.
We totally have.
All right. So the year in Bath, North Carolina is now 1899, and this story wound up being the most fascinating for me of the entire bunch, even though it started as a throwaway line in the Forgotten Tales of North Carolina.
Oh, go for it.
The Witch of Goose Creek Island.
Oh.
So Goose Creek State Park is right down the road from the Devil's Hoof Prince or Magic Horse Tracks, whatever you want to call it. And I checked that out. Beautiful state park. Absolutely awesome. It sits in between Bath and the town of Washington. Really cool swamp walk. I found a bone. I don't know. I kept it. It's like a little jawbone. There's a weirdly burnt down tree that made me think of your fire tree from the Patreon exclusive episode.
Yeah.
It was like in the middle of this swamp. Like, I got to show you a picture. It was just like a single tree had been burnt down.
Mm-hmm.
Very strange.
By lightning.
Yeah, probably. There was a bunch of ladies running around in the woods dressed up like witches from a Hallmark card, like big pointy hats.
Yeah. People. I'm very into that.
I'm guessing they were just doing it for the gram, but I don't know. Big vibes in Goose Creek State Park.
Yeah, that's really great.
So I will say that Goose Creek itself is across the river from modern day Bath, and there's an island called Goose Creek Island that is adjacent to the creek. And all of this that I'm describing would have been under the umbrella of, if not Bath itself, then certainly Bath County. So that's why I'm including the story. It is from across the river, but you can see it. And at some point it would have gotten roped in. And this story, like I said, I found it in that Forgotten Tales of North Carolina book. Like with most stories in there, not a lot of detail. But then I found variations on it from the Eastern Reflector newspaper in 1899 in Pamtico Tracings, the Beaufort County Genealogical Society journal from 1996. I contacted them and was like, hey, can I get a copy of that? They sent me a copy of an article attributed to the Watchtower in 1899 with direct quotes from a party to the story not present in the Reflector.
Huh.
And then again, an abbreviated version in Forgotten Tales of North Carolina from 2006.
Yeah.
So I got a copy of scans of the Reflector from 1899. It looks amazing. Do you remember the old table decorations in Wendy's? How they look like old-timey newspapers?
Yeah.
It really looks like that. It's great.
Fabulous.
Kind of note in there was an ad for Trinity College, which we now know is Duke.
That's funny.
It was pretty neat. And this tale was attributed first to a minister that went by the name H.S. Davenport. The Forgotten Tales said he was a well-known theologian of his time. That is not true. I found some marriage certificates that had him as the officiant. He was a real person. He was certainly alive in 1899. It's not a nom de plume, but he is definitely not as prominent as he was made to seem at one point.
He didn't go around the countryside sleeping in coffins and doing big shows.
Well, so I think he might have been tooting his own horn a little bit to the newspaper. Because remember that the Whitfield curse loomed heavy in the region.
Yeah.
And he might have fancied himself something of an up-and-comer.
Okay.
And this is relevant because although he's not explicitly named as a member of the Latter-day Saint movement in the article, it did appear in the Watchtower in 1899. And it's worth noting that John Smith said in one of his revelations that he brought up the dust shaking thing. And it's something that Mormon missionaries were instructed to do, to curse people.
Well, there you go.
If you were rejected while doing your work, you were to judge them to save God time. No, I'm serious. This is like really what John Smith said.
I know that is true and factual. I just find it such a funny concept that God is like, okay, here's the deal, folks. I need to outsource some of this. Just too much on my plate. Too much.
It's insane. So John Smith says to do the dust shaking thing and damn people to hell.
Yeah.
If they don't want to talk to you when they knock on your door. That's the initial one. A year later, he issues another revelation that says, well, don't do it in front of them. because it was upsetting people. Like there's a series of them over the course of like 3 years where there's like, damn them to hell.
Yeah.
Wait, the next year. Okay, we're getting beat up. You can do that, but not in front of them.
Wait until you're around the corner.
Right. And then the third one was the one like a year after that was like, okay, damn them to hell. Don't do it in front of them, but also be super happy because you just saved God time. John Smith, everybody.
Wow.
You can look that up. I'm not making any of that up.
No, I know. I absolutely believe it. Remember, I said I know people who would do this.
Yeah. Anyway, H.S. Davenport sends a story to the Watchtower, not entirely convinced that he wasn't trying to be like George Whitefield.
Mm-hmm.
Regional local guy playing into this character.
Sure.
So anyway, 1898, there's an 84-year-old guy named Reuben Benson Lewis. Goes by Ben Lewis. Lives on Goose Creek Island, and I was able to verify this, like right down to the age using birth and death records. This is a real person. Described as a respected member of the community, lives with his 50-year-old wife and his 17-year-old daughter. And this was not his first marriage from the records that I could find. And unfortunately, the second wife goes unnamed. Might have been a common law situation.
Mm-hmm.
So her name might not be on any records. We do know that the daughter's name was Betty. So the Lewis family are in their house one night and rocks and bricks begin smacking into the house outside.
Oh.
Yeah. So Mr. Lewis goes outside. He's an 84-year-old man. Goes outside, looks and doesn't see anyone. Shocker. Probably because he's 84 years old. In 1898. A day or two later, it happens again, only this time an axe that he had left outside comes through the window.
Oh, geez.
They run outside, don't see anyone. He decides that it's on. He's like, all right, well, somebody's messing with us and I can't have this. So he stays up all night, waits for stuff to start flying around out in the yard, runs out front, shoots his gun in the direction that he believes the rocks are coming from. Nothing happens. Calls the neighbors. Basically assembles a neighborhood watch for his house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They all report seeing rocks and bricks seemingly falling from the sky or coming from unknown directions and flying about.
So this, I was going to say, like, this is the rocks and bricks, like hitting the house is classic poltergeist activity.
Mm-hmm. It's worth noting at this point, while running this down, I did find that in 1880 near Statesville, North Carolina, there was an incident with rocks falling out of the sky, possibly carried by a storm that killed a bunch of cattle belonging to a guy named Jacob Parker. So apparently raining rocks was a thing in the 1800s.
Oh, yeah, totally. This is one of Charles Fort's favorite areas of study. A lot of his Fortean books are about like weird stuff that fell from the sky and the possibility that it had come from storms that carried it.
Yeah. Again, I'm exploring all angles here, right? So there is precedent for it, but it is weird that a bunch of people said it looked like they were flying about.
Yes, very unusual.
So at that point, things quiet down and they're like, whew, thank God, things aren't flying around our yard anymore. And then it gets even weirder. They're outside of the house one day and they had locked it up when they went outside to like muck around in the yard and do whatever. With everything that had been going on, they hear stomping and stamping inside their house. So they rush in and find hoof prints like that of a very small horse.
A magical horse.
A magical horse.
What's the name of the villain from My Little Pony? I love it. I love it, love it, love it.
Oh, it's about to get just bizarre, but I tie it all together with my theory at the end.
Sure.
So at this point, Mrs. Lewis, who is reported to be a very respectable and trustworthy member of the community, states that she couldn't hide it anymore. She had to come clean. She had been ridden by a witch.
Oh.
Everyone is stunned and says, I'm sorry, what? And she said that a man purporting to be a witch had come to her and through dark magic placed a saddle upon her. She had become like a horse and he had ridden her about.
Stuff like that is also a part of traditional belief in, I don't know what the word that I'm trying to come up with is, malevolent witches in communities. I mean, this is straight up like witch hunt kind of material.
They don't go there, which is good. They do not witch hunt.
Okay, that's good.
So everybody's like, oh, okay. So a couple of days later, the daughter runs over to a neighbor asking for help because the witch had gotten her mother.
Oh.
Mrs. Lewis was found covered in mud and making horse noises.
Oh.
She claimed the witch had come back and ridden her several miles to a cemetery and tied her to a headstone before she escaped and came back. She did not know who the man was. No one in the town had any clue, and it was all really weird.
So there's not some guy in town that everybody's like, oh, we know about him.
Nope.
Okay.
This, according to one quote, this all put the man in a mood, and he was grumpy for some time.
I would imagine so. I have a lot of possible reactions to this, and I'm going to save them.
So the story ends. Mr. Lewis dies a few years later, and there's no more phenomena. And it's so weird. There were witnesses to flying objects. She couldn't have made the noises in the locked house. So my going theory is that the teenage daughter was a trigger for poltergeist activity, and the mom made the witch story up to cover for her.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't necessarily buy that poltergeist activities are necessarily spirit related, and they're not more like focused energies centering on an individual. There's a paper I found in a research journal called Neuroquantology, which is a interdisciplinary journal at the intersection of neuroscience and quantum physics. And that research article by this doctor explores adolescence as catalysts for historical poltergeist activity.
See, so I wasn't sure if you had described the daughter as having been an adolescent, but I was going to ask, was there an adolescent in the house? Because that is classic adolescent manifested telekinesis being the source of what is interpreted as poltergeist activity. And I wholeheartedly agree. There are too many stories that are too similar from too many cultures for that to be something that is just totally made up. But I also just don't buy that it's necessarily all angry ghosts. If there are ghosts, I imagine a lot of them are angry. But I also don't think that like their only move is let's throw the china around. So, I feel like if I were an angry ghost,
I just pictured professional wrestling ghosts doing different moves from the top rope.
Right. In so many poltergeist stories, there's an adolescent person involved, and then sort of time passes and the effect fades. And the person in the house undergoing the most dynamic change is the adolescent. And a lot of really important brain formation happens at those ages, and a lot of really significant brain chemistry and really like fluctuating brain chemistry during those times. Anybody who's ever been a teenager knows that, much less lived with one. There's just such an obvious explanation there that has to be retained as a possibility. I'm not saying that it's the only possibility, but like the second that I was like, okay, there's a teenage person in the house, this is not a witch riding this woman.
Right. It's definitely the mom making excuses.
Yeah.
And the thing is, these are all real people. Everyone that's named in there, you can find them. And this was so widely reported. Like, it's wild. I don't know. I really, really like this one for how weird it is.
Yeah.
And I want to do a deep dive on poltergeists. Like, obviously, we did a bunch of, I won't call them bite size, but fun size. We did a bunch of fun size stories out of Bath. I really want to do a deep dive on poltergeist activity. And I actually have a story set aside for us to explore that in my little journal of ideas. I don't know when we're going to get to it, but anyway. Yeah, what's absolutely certain is these are real people, and the story was widely circulated.
Yeah, I like your interpretation that it's the mom covering for the daughter. My immediate first thought was, if the daughter has manifested telekinetic abilities, extraordinary mental capabilities, then is it that big of a stretch to say that an expression of those capabilities is the mother experiencing a really awful experience of having a quote-unquote witch man show up and saddle her and ride her and go tie her to a headstand somewhere?
It's pronounced Witchman.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Witchman.
When I was a teenager, I certainly felt some resentments towards my parents. And I imagine that if somebody is going through this sort of tumultuous experiences that could lead to axes getting flung through the windows and rocks hitting the house from outside because of their manifestation of psychic powers, it's just not that big of a leap to say that it's also going to affect one of their parents.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. This is a fun one.
Yeah, it really is.
And it was a throwaway. Like, I was going to include it. Like, yeah, I went to this park and there's this like 3-line thing in this book about the witch or something. I don't know. But then the more I dug, that's why it took me forever to have this episode, this series of episodes ready. Cause like this one in particular, I kept finding newspaper articles, and I found the Watchtower article, and I contacted the Genealogical Society, and it was just like the rabbit hole just keeps going.
Also, just a big shout out into historical societies, like local historical societies and local genealogical societies in general, because those folks are dedicated volunteers. They are such amazing resources. And if you have any curiosity, whether stuff like this has ever happened in the place where you are, call up the local historical society, call it the local genealogical society, and ask. Those people would be delighted to discuss the weird stuff in your town's history with you.
Really quick, this does not warrant its own story, but there's one last thing out of Bath. Between 1913 and 1941, this is just modern weird. This isn't supernatural at all. the James Adams Floating Theater. It was a touring showboat, and it visited Bath, North Carolina in 1925. While it was visiting, doing shows at that location, it was visited by Edna Ferberwin. Her visit became the basis for her book, Showboat, which was later made into a number of musicals and films. You can watch it on Turner Classic Movies starring Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
So Showboat. Wow. I watched it with my grandfather last year.
That's amazing.
Wow. If you're trying to find the marker in Bath for the Showboat, there's a tiny library right near it. And it is filled with the stupidest trashy romance novels. Like, that's all that's in there. Like, just overflowing with them. So look for the tiny library overflowing with the lamest looking trashy romance novels. And just beyond that, you can read the historical marker about the James Adams Floating Theater.
Duly noted. Both sites to see.
So that's it. That is the first in what I hope will be several this winter deep dives.
Wow. I loved it. Thank you very much for doing that. That was great.
Yeah, no sweat. I feel like a great weight has been lifted. I feel like the dust has been shaken off my feet.
I'm going to go find Whitfield's grave and stomp around on it a little, and then I'm going to go shake his dust. I'm going to do it right in front of him.
12.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.